Hello and welcome to our podcast, where today we're diving into the basics of English grammar. If you're learning English and want to make sure you understand the grammar rules well, this is the place for you. I'm Emma, and here with me is Max.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to help you all understand English grammar better. It might seem a little tricky at first, but we're going to keep things simple and fun. Our goal is to make you feel confident when speaking and writing in English.
Yes, exactly. So where do we start? I think a great place is with nouns and pronouns. These are two basic parts of grammar, and they're everywhere in English.
Good idea, Emma. Let's start with nouns. So, a noun is basically a word that names a person, place, thing, or idea. For example, words like teacher, city, book, and happiness are all nouns. Nouns are all around us.
Right, nouns are like the building blocks of our sentences. Without nouns, we wouldn't know what we're talking about, and they can be either singular or plural. Singular nouns mean just one, like apple or car, and plural nouns mean more than one, like apples or cars.
Yes, that's a key point. Now, when it comes to making nouns plural, we usually just add an S or ls at the end, but there are some irregular ones too. Words like child change to children, and man changes to men.
Irregular plurals are interesting, aren't they? English has a lot of them, okay. So now let's talk about pronouns. Pronouns are words we use to replace nouns. Instead of saying Emma every time, I could say she, or instead of the book, I could say it.
That's right. Pronouns make sentences smoother. There are different types of pronouns too. For example, we have subject pronouns like I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. These pronouns are used as the main subject of a sentence.
And we also have object pronouns like Emmy, you, him, her, us, and them. We use these after action words or verbs. So instead of saying, I gave the book to Max, I can say, I gave it to him.
Perfect. Now that we know nouns and pronouns, let's look at verbs. Verbs are words that tell us what the action is in a sentence. They're like the heart of the sentence. Words like run, speak, eat, and read are all verbs. They show us what someone or something is doing.
Exactly, and verbs change based on tense. The tense tells us when the action is happening, like the past, present, or future. For example, if I say, I walk, that's present tense because I'm talking about now. But if I say, I walked, that's past tense because it already happened.
And then we have the future tense, which shows what will happen. So, I could say, I will walk. Understanding verb tenses is key because they tell us so much about the time of an action.
That's true, Max. So now we've covered nouns, pronouns, and verbs, which are three of the most important parts of any sentence. But there are also words that connect our ideas, like adjectives and adverbs.
Oh, adjectives, these are really useful. Adjectives describe nouns and give us more information. If we say a big dog, big is an adjective because it tells us more about the dog. Or a happy child. Happy is the adjective there.
And then we have adverbs, which are like the cousins of adjectives. Adverbs give us more information about verbs, adjectives, or even other adverbs. For example, if I say, she sings beautifully, beautifully is the adverb, and it tells us how she sings.
Yes, adverbs often end in "ly." But not always. Sometimes they look just like adjectives. Words like fast and hard can be both adjectives and adverbs depending on how we use them.
Good point. So, with nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, we can already build sentences that make sense. But there are still some more basic parts of grammar we should go over to really understand English sentences.
Right. Next, let's look at articles. Articles are words like a, an, and the. They go before nouns and tell us a bit more about them. And are used for something general, like a car or an apple, meaning any car or any apple.
And it is more specific. If I say, I want the book, it means a particular book, not just any book. Using articles correctly can help make your sentences clearer and more specific.
Exactly, and one more important part of grammar is prepositions. These are words that show a relationship between a noun or pronoun and another word in the sentence. Common prepositions are in, on, at, with, by, and for. For example, the book is on the table. Here, on shows where the book is.
Yes, prepositions help us describe time and place, too. Like in the morning, at night, or by the river. They're small words but very important.
They really are. Now, let's practice a little. Think of a sentence like the dog runs quickly in the yard. Here is the article. Dog is the noun, runs is the verb, quickly is the adverb, and in is the preposition.
That's a great example, Max. And I think understanding each word's job in a sentence really makes English grammar a lot easier to work with.
It does, and once we know the basics, we can start building more complex sentences with confidence.
Now, let's dive back in. We've covered a lot about nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Today, let's talk about how to bring these words together to make sentences that sound natural and correct in English. And a big part of that is understanding sentence structure and agreement.
Exactly, Emma, sentence structure is so important. In English, sentences generally follow a subject-verb-object order. So, for a basic sentence like she eats apples, we have she as the subject, eats as the verb, and apples as the object. This pattern helps make English clear.
That's true. And one thing to note here is that English is very structured compared to some other languages. When we keep this order, it's easy for others to understand us. But what if we want to add more information to our sentence? That's when we can use different phrases.
Right, let's talk about prepositional phrases first. We mentioned prepositions like in, on, and at. When we combine these prepositions with nouns, they form a phrase, like in the garden or at the store. Prepositional phrases add detail and help us say exactly where or when something happens.
Yes, and here's a simple example. The dog sleeps in the garden. We had the basic sentence, the dog sleeps, and then we add in the garden to show where the dog is sleeping. Adding these small details can really change the meaning and make our sentences more interesting.
And another type of phrase we use a lot in English is an adjective phrase. Instead of just saying, the flower is beautiful, we can expand it with an adjective phrase. The flower in the garden is beautiful. This tells us more about the flower.
Right, and understanding these phrases is great because it lets us expand on our ideas clearly. Now, let's move on to agreement in sentences, especially subject-verb agreement. This can be a little tricky sometimes, but is very important in English grammar.
Yes, so subject-verb agreement means that the subject and verb in a sentence must match in number. If the subject is singular, like she, then the verb should be singular too, like walks, so we'd say she walks, not she walk, but if we're talking about more than one person, we'd say they walk.
That's right, and it's really important to get this right because it can make a big difference in how clear your sentence sounds. Think of a sentence like the cats play in the yard. Here, cats is plural, and we use play to match that. But if it's just one cat, we'd say, the cat plays in the yard.
Exactly, and then there are verbs like to be, which can change a lot depending on the subject. For example, we say I am, you are, and he is. These might feel like small words, but they're very important in English. When we get them right, it makes our sentences sound smooth and correct.
Very true. And once we have the structure and agreement down, we can also talk about questions and negatives in English. These are also key to really mastering basic grammar, so let's start with forming questions.
Questions are a big part of conversation. In English, we often change the word order or add helping verbs like do or does to make a question. For example, the sentence "you like pizza" becomes "do you like pizza?" when we make it a question.
Right, and we can also ask questions with words like what, where, when, who, why, and how. These are called question words. So instead of just you are going, we can ask, where are you going? Or when are you going?
Yes, and these question words help us get more specific answers. So if I ask, why are you studying? The answer might be because I have a test tomorrow. It adds more to the conversation and makes our questions clear.
Good point. And making questions is just one side of it. To talk about something that isn't true, we use negatives. In English, we usually add not after our helping verb. For example, instead of I am going, we'd say, I am not going.
And if we don't have a helping verb, we add one to make it negative. For example, she likes coffee because she does not like coffee, or we can use the contraction doesn't like she doesn't like coffee. It's a simple change but really helps us express what we mean.
Absolutely, Max. Now, let's talk a bit about conjunctions. These are small words like and, but, and, or that help us join ideas together. If I want to say, I like apples and I like oranges, I can combine them. I like apples and oranges.
Conjunctions make sentences flow better and add similar ideas but shows a contrast and or gives us options. So, if I say, I want coffee or tea, it means I'd like one of the two.
That's right. Conjunctions are really useful. And then we have clauses. They're like mini sentences within a sentence. Clauses can be independent or dependent. An independent clause can stand alone, like I went to the park. A dependent clause, on the other hand, can't stand alone and needs more information, like because it was sunny.
That's a great explanation, Emma. When we combine an independent clause with a dependent one, we get more interesting sentences. So instead of just I went to the park, we can say I went to the park because it was sunny. Adding that reason makes the sentence richer.
Exactly, it helps us share more detail without adding too many separate sentences. And I think once learners understand clauses, it really opens up more possibilities for making sentences that are clearer and full of meaning.
Agreed, and another important part of grammar is knowing how to use modals. Modals are helping verbs like can, could, will, would, should, and might. They add meaning to our main verbs and can change the tone of a sentence.
Yes, modals are interesting because they express things like possibility, ability, or advice. For example, I can swim shows ability, and I might go shows possibility. They're small but powerful words that add a lot of detail.
Exactly, and modals also help us be more polite. Instead of saying, give me the book, we can say, could you give me the book? Adding could makes it sound more polite and softens the request.
That's a good tip, Max. Now, I think we should talk about auxiliary verbs, or helping verbs like do, be, and have. These help us make questions, negatives, and different tenses in English. For example, to make I walk into a question, we add do I walk? Or for a negative, we add not, I do not walk.
That's right, Emma, and be is often used in continuous tenses like I am walking to show an ongoing action. And have is used in perfect tenses like I have walked, which tells us the action happened in the past but affects the present.
Yes, auxiliary verbs give us so many ways to express different times and ideas. And once we know how to use these, it's easier to speak about things in a variety of ways.
Absolutely, and all these grammar basics really give us a strong foundation. With them, we can build sentences that make sense, ask questions, share details, and even talk about possibilities and polite requests.
Definitely, Max. With these essentials, nouns, verbs, phrases, agreement, modals, and auxiliary verbs, English starts to feel a lot more natural. And the best way to improve is by practicing, trying different sentences, and listening to English.
Let's get into our last section. We've talked about the parts of a sentence like nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositional phrases, and sentence structure. Now, let's focus on tenses and how they help us talk about time in English. Understanding tenses will help you talk about the past, the present, and the future, which is essential in English.
That's right, Max. Tenses can seem tricky at first, but they're really just tools that help us talk about when something happens. Let's start with the present tense, which we use to talk about actions happening now or things that are always true.
Exactly. We have the simple present tense for things like routines or facts. For example, I eat breakfast every morning, or the sun rises in the east. In these sentences, the action is general. It's a routine or a fact, not something happening at this very moment.
And then we have the present continuous tense, which we use when something is happening right now. For example, I am eating breakfast, or she is studying. Here, we add am, is, or are with the verb ending in ing to show that the action is ongoing.
Good point, Emma. We can also use the present continuous to talk about things happening around the current time, even if they aren't happening right this second. For example, I am reading a new book. It's happening in general, but not necessarily at this exact moment.
And after the present tenses, we have the past tense, which is for things that have already happened. The simple past is used to talk about completed actions, like I walked to the store or they watched a movie.
Yes, and the structure is usually simple. We just change the verb to the past form. For regular verbs, we add ed, like walked or played, but for irregular verbs like go or eat, the forms change, so it becomes went and ate.
That's right, irregular verbs are a bit different, but they're important to learn because they're common in everyday language. Now, just like with the present, there's also the past continuous tense. This is for actions that were ongoing in the past, like I was eating or they were studying.
And it helps to show that something happened over a period of time in the past or at the same time as another action. For example, I was watching TV when you called. It tells us that one action was happening in the background while something else happened.
Great example. Now, let's talk about the future tense, which helps us discuss things that will happen later. The simplest way is to use will with the base form of the verb, like I will go to the party or she will call you later.
Yes, and we can also use going to for things we plan to do in the future. So instead of I will eat lunch, we might say I am going to eat lunch. It's like we're saying we're almost certain about doing it.
Exactly, and understanding these simple tenses, present, past, and future, can really help make your conversations much clearer. But there are also perfect tenses in English, which let us talk about actions in a more detailed way.
Right, let's start with the present perfect tense. We use this to talk about actions that happened at some point in the past but are connected to the present. For example, I have finished my homework means the homework was completed in the past and now it's done.
Yes, and to make this tense, we use have or has with the past participle of the verb, like I have eaten or she has gone. It's a great way to talk about things that still affect the present.
Exactly. Then we have the past perfect tense, which is used when we want to talk about something that happened before another action in the past. For instance, I had eaten before you arrived. This means the eating was done before the arrival.
And to make it, we use had with the past participle, like had eaten or had gone. It's very useful when we're telling stories or describing a sequence of past events.
Right, and finally, we have the future perfect tense for talking about things that will be completed before a specific time in the future. So we could say, I will have finished my work by tomorrow.
Yes, with future perfect, we use will have with the past participle, like will have done or will have seen. It's helpful when we want to be clear about finishing something before a certain point in the future.
Now that we've covered tenses, let's move on to conditional sentences. Conditionals are great for talking about possibilities and imagining different situations. They usually start with if.
Yes, and there are 4 main types of conditionals. The zero conditional is for things that are always true, like if you heat water, it boils. Here, we're talking about a fact, something that always happens.
Then there's the first conditional for real, possible situations in the future. We might say, if it rains, I will take an umbrella. It's like saying, if this happens, I will do that.
The second conditional is more for imagining things that probably won't happen or are just hypothetical. So, for example, if I won the lottery, I would travel the world. It's a nice way to dream or talk about unlikely scenarios.
And finally, the third conditional is for imagining things that didn't happen in the past but could have changed things. So we might say, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the test. It's like thinking about what if moments in the past.
These conditionals are great because they let us talk about possibilities and wishes. They really add a lot to our language and help us express so much more.
Definitely, Emma, and now. I think we should briefly talk about articles, a, an, and the. They're small but very important in English.
Yes, articles help us be clear about whether we're talking about something specific or general. So, a and an are used for any one of something, like a book or an apple, while the is used for something specific, like the book on the table.
It can take some practice to get used to articles, especially because some languages don't use them. But in English, they help make our meaning clear, so it's worth the effort.
That's so true, Max. And another thing to remember is capitalization. In English, we always capitalize the first word of a sentence and proper nouns like names of people, places, and even days of the week or months of the year. So we'd write Emma with a capital E and October with a capital O.
Capitalization is important because it signals the beginning of sentences and helps us see names or important places right away. It's something small that really makes a difference in writing.
And while we're on writing, let's quickly cover punctuation. Periods, commas, question marks, and exclamation points are basic punctuation marks in English. A period ends a sentence, a comma can separate ideas, and question marks and exclamation points show questions or excitement.
That's right, and punctuation really helps readers follow along and understand tone. Imagine reading a long paragraph with no punctuation. It would be so confusing.
Absolutely. Punctuation, capitalization, articles, and understanding tenses and conditionals are all tools to help learners communicate clearly. They may seem small, but these details can make your English much more fluent and easy to understand.
And remember, learning grammar is a process. You don't need to be perfect all at once. Start with the basics, practice using them, and little by little, you'll get more comfortable.
Exactly, Max. Grammar is like the foundation of a house. Once you have it, you can add more to it and keep building until you're really confident in your English.
Thanks for joining us today. Keep practicing these basics, and you'll be amazed at how much your English improves. Don't forget, learning takes time, so be patient and enjoy the journey.
And before we go, remember to subscribe to our channel and share this podcast with your friends and family who are also learning English. We hope this podcast helps you on your way to mastering English grammar.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck on your grammar journey.
Bye, everyone, and happy learning!